some various camps. And so I have a lot of fun working with Drupal. Also, I am a host of the Developing Up podcast, which is not Drupal specific, but it's a podcast focused on the non-technical side of being a developer and those other skills they don't teach you when you're getting your computer science degree. If you want to know more about me or Genuine, you can find me anywhere on the internet at MikeMiles86, Drupal.org, Twitter, whatnot. And you can find more about Genuine at wearegenuine.com. So today I have 3 goals that I want to get through. The first goal is to explain to everyone what AJAX callback commands are. These are the secret sauce, I like to call it, of AJAX functionality in Drupal. And so I want to explain what it's composed of, how they are used, and then hopefully how you can use them for your own personal goals in your Drupal projects. So my second goal is to actually outline that second aspect, is how to build your own AJAX callback commands, and then how to use them in AJAX requests in your projects. And my third goal is to complete those first 2 goals by demonstrating AJAX callback commands to you guys. I'll have a couple of example scenarios we'll go through just to show actually how AJAX callback commands are used, excuse me. So to start off with, I want to define callback commands, and I always try to use some sort of analogy that everyone can recognize and understand. And since it's the 1-year anniversary of Drupal 8, I was trying to think of something celebratory that we all recognize. So this is the analogy I came up with. If AJAX requests in Drupal 8 were a cupcake, then callback commands would be the frosting on top. Now, the point of this is that you can't have a cupcake without frosting. If you have a cupcake and there's no frosting, then it's a muffin. Just like in Drupal 8 and in Drupal 7 and somewhat in Drupal 6, you can't have an AJAX request be made without callback commands being involved. They are part of every request that Drupal makes in every sort of AJAX functionality. So to put it more clearly, AJAX callback commands are the instructions that are built on the server side for an AJAX request, and they're executed by the client. And then basically, drop my mic. Okay, sorry about that. So anytime an AJAX request occurs in Drupal, it sends a request to the server, to an endpoint. And then Drupal on the server side builds a response of functions that should be executed. And these are actually JavaScript functions that should be executed on the client. Now, all AJAX Framework in Drupal 8 is controlled by what's known as the AJAX Framework. The AJAX Framework has a couple pieces to it. It's part of Drupal core. It controls all AJAX functionality. So if you've seen AJAX functions on forms or on links and changing elements on the page, that's all handled by the AJAX framework. It allows you to add the AJAX attribute to form elements or to links. Now this framework, again, is provided by Drupal core, and it's been in Drupal core since Drupal 7, where it was known as the AJAX API. Callback commands for the AJAX framework, which Drupal core provides, compose of 2 parts. The first part is JavaScript. So the AJAX framework provides a global JavaScript object, which I'll get into in a little bit. And this object has functions attached to it, and these are callback commands. In Drupal 8 core, there are 25 commands, and they are basically wrappers for jQuery methods. So like insert, or remove, or slide down, things that actions that jQuery can perform are wrapped in JavaScript functions attached to a global object. And then the second half of a callback command is composed of PHP. In Drupal 8, the PHP is a class that implements a class from the AJAX framework and returns a certain set of markup when it is instantiated, to then build a response to send to the client. Now, where the AJAX framework is completely defined in Drupal 8 core, callback commands are defined either in core, as I said, there are 25 of them, or in modules, custom modules or contrib modules. A good example of this is the views module, which technically is part of Drupal 8 core, but the views module defines its own callback commands that extends the ones that are provided by Drupal 8 core. Other modules like the CTools module also provides custom commands. So let's take a little look deeper into what a callback command looks like on the JavaScript side. So as I said, callback commands are attached to a global object provided by the AJAX Framework. Now the object is known as the Drupal.ajaxcommands.prototype object. And this JavaScript object is defined in the ajax.js file, which is located in the miscellaneous directory in the Drupal root. This file has been in this location since Drupal 6. It's just the name of the object has changed in Drupal 8. Now all callback commands, again, are functions attached to this object, and every function that's a callback command accepts 3 arguments, and it's expected to have 3 arguments. That first argument is AJAX. This contains information about the AJAX request that was made, so the element that triggered it, the endpoint that is being requested, the element that is marked to be altered, information such as that. The second argument is known as the response. This is the most important one and most widely used one by the callback commands. The response argument contains all the data that has been sent back by the server to this function. So that may be information about data to place on the page, like HTML markup. It may be elements to select and to trigger, or any other data that the JavaScript function is expected to be able to execute on. And the third argument is status, and this is just the status code of the request. So whether it's 500, 404, 300, or hopefully a 200 response. Now, as I said, these functions are just wrappers for additional JavaScript. The core ones being wrappers for jQuery methods, but it can be any JavaScript that you want to have executed after an AJAX request occurs. So let's take a look at the typical structure for the JavaScript side of a callback command. So here I have some code that outlines what the structure would look like for a module. Typically, you will find callback commands defined in a JavaScript file that's located in the JS directory of a module. So on line 10 here of this example code, we have that core object, Drupal.ajaxcommands.prototype, and attached to it would be the callback command. The naming typically follows lower camel case naming conventions. And again, it's a function that accepts those 3 arguments, AJAX response and status. And then inside of it would just be any custom JavaScript that wants to be executed when this function is called. Okay, let's take a look at the PHP side of a callback command. So in Drupal 8, since we have the Symfony framework, a lot of the PHP is object-oriented and class-based. So callback commands on the PHP side are classes that implement the command interface. Now, I'm sure you've heard before that an interface is basically a contract in code. So anytime a PHP class implements an interface, it's agreeing that it will define methods, which are functions that are part of a class. It'll define methods that the interface itself defines. For callback commands, there is one method that they have to define, and that's known as the render method. So when an AJAX request is being built on the server side to send to the client, it will call the render method on any commands attached to that response object. Now this render method, all it is expected to do is return a PHP associative array. And all that associative array has to have in it is a single element with the key of command. The value of this element is the name of the JavaScript function to be executed. So the JavaScript function that's attached to that global JavaScript object. Now this associative array can contain other data and other elements, and these elements are what are passed in that response argument to the JavaScript function. So they become the response data. So let's take a look at the structure of a callback command PHP class. Now for a module, the PHP class for a callback command has to live in a specific place, and this has to do with what's known as PSR4 auto-loading that Drupal 8 uses. So from the root of a module, you'll find callback commands in the source directory, inside that the AJAX directory with a capital A, and inside that in a file that is named command name command.php, with the command name being upper camel case. Now this file name is the exact same name as the class. So on line 5 of this example code, we see that we have a class that's called command name command, following upper camel case, and it implements that command interface class provided by the AJAX Framework. Since it implements the command interface, it has to return a render method or contain a render method. So on line 8, we have the render method. And again, this render method must return an associative array on line 9 of our example code. And that associative array must have one element in it with the key of command on line 10, and the value being the name of the JavaScript function to execute after the AJAX response is returned to the client. So these are how callback commands are structured. We'll take a look at one from Drupal 8 core, the remove command, one that's used very often. Now, since the remove command is provided by Drupal 8 core, it will be found in the same file, that ajax.js file in the miscellaneous directory, as the actual JavaScript object itself. So this is a snippet of code from the ajax.js. And on line 1 in this file, that object, that global object of Drupal.ajaxcommands.prototype is defined. And then a little while down in that file, we'll see the remove command on line 12 of this code example is defined. Again, as a function with those 3 arguments, AJAX Response and status. And it just wraps some additional JavaScript. We'll see on line 14 that this function is using data from the response to figure out what the selector string, the CSS selector string it should target on the page. So response.selector. It's going to do some Drupal-y things that Drupal likes to take care of, like remove additional behaviors attached to that object. But basically, all this function is doing is on line 17, it's calling the jQuery remove command. Now, if we look at the PHP side of the remove command, this file is defined in the directory core, lib, Drupal, core, Ajax, remove command.php. So we'll see on line 7 that the remove command follows upper camel case naming conventions called remove command, and it implements that command interface just as all callback commands must do. It has a render method on line 12 that returns that associative array on line 13, passing that element with the key of command and the value being the name of the JavaScript function remove on line 14. And then it passes a CSS selector that gets added to this class when it gets implemented. So if we look at these 2 pieces of code, these 2 sides of a callback command in conjunction for the remove command, on the PHP code example at the top on line 4, in the render array, we're returning the value element with the key of command and the value being remove. And on line 2 of the JavaScript code, we'll see that that is the name of the function. It's remove, lower camel casing. Looking back up at the PHP code, we'll see that this array also returns an element with the key of selector and a CSS selector string that got defined. And we can see that being used in line 4 of the JavaScript code on the bottom, again, as part of the response argument, response.selector. So callback commands. They are used in all AJAX requests provided in Drupal 8 core. Anything that uses the AJAX framework, every request is going to be returning callback commands and using those on the page. A callback command itself is composed of 2 parts, a JavaScript function that is attached to that global object provided by the AJAX framework, and a PHP class that implements command interface, which means it agrees to contain a render method that returns an associative array with that element in it that has the key of command and the value being the name of the JavaScript function. And again, callback commands are provided by Drupal core, of which, again, there are 25 in Drupal 8, and then any other modules that define them and that you add to your Drupal project. Great, so we know the structure of callback commands and what they are. Let's take a look at creating our own. Because again, Drupal 8 core only has 25. Most of them are jQuery wrappers. You may want to do something a lot different with your own AJAX functionality. So let's pull out an example scenario so we can all follow along. Now, one jQuery method that is not contained in a callback command is the jQuery slide down animation effect. I don't see why Drupal 8 core would have this in it, so it makes sense they wouldn't have a callback command defined. But let's define one ourselves. Now, just to familiarize you with the slide down animation, it works like this. You have an element on the page. When it triggers the slide down, it exposes another element that's on the page in this nice little animation. So let's make a callback command that allows us to trigger this sort of animation with an AJAX request. Now, anytime you want to create a callback command, you have to do it in a module. There's no other way to make your own commands that I'm aware of. So for our example scenario, we're going to create our own module. I'm not going to go through all the specifics of writing a module in Drupal 8. That'd be too verbose for this presentation, but I'll touch on some of the pieces that you do need. So obviously, you need an info.yaml file, so Drupal knows about your module. And we're going to call our module slide down, and with the namespace slide_down. So we have our YAML file, our info.yaml file defined. Now we know a callback command has two parts, a JavaScript function and a PHP class. So let's go ahead and create our JavaScript function. So we create a JavaScript file within our module in the JS directory, and we'll call our JavaScript file slide_down-command.js. And on line 6 of our JavaScript code, we're going to attach our function to that global object provided by the AJAX Framework, Drupal.ajaxcommands.prototype, with our function being called slide down in lower camel case. We know our function accepts those three arguments that all callback commands accept, AJAX Response and status. And then we just wrap some jQuery that we want to execute, some JavaScript we want to execute. So on line 8, we're going to check to see if the response from the server returned a duration or how fast the animation should occur. And on line 10, we actually look for a CSS selector that the response sent to us and target those elements on the page. And we call the jQuery method of slide down, passing the duration to it. Very simple wrapper of JavaScript. Now to add custom JavaScript to a page in Drupal 8, you can't just call Drupal add.js or attach it ways you would in Drupal 7. You have to use what's known as an asset library. So in our custom module, so that our callback command can be used, we're going to go ahead and define an asset library. You do this in the libraries.yaml file within your module. So we have slide down.libraries.yaml. And we give it an asset name that is custom within the scope of this module. So on line 1, we call it slide down. Then we tell Drupal where to find the JavaScript for this library anytime this library gets included. So on line 3 and 4, we say this library has JavaScript in it. And from the root of our module, it's located in the JS directory and in the file called slide down-command.js. Now what's cool about asset libraries is just the way in modules you can depend on other modules, you can have libraries depend on other libraries. So we know since we're writing a callback command, we have a dependency on the AJAX framework. So we add that as a dependency to our asset library on line 5 and 6. We're telling Drupal, anytime this library gets included so that this callback command can be used, make sure to include the AJAX library as well. So we have that global object available that we can attach to. Okay, let's look at the PHP side of our custom slide down command. Now again, because of PSR4 autoloading, we place this class in a specific location. So from the root of our module, we place it in the source directory, the AJAX directory with a capital A, in a file called slide_down-command.php. So on line 4 of our code, we define a class. We call it slide down command in upper camel case. And we implement that command interface, and we agree to that contract with the AJAX framework, which means we have to return or define a render method on line 13. Again, we're going to build a render associative array with an element with the key of command on line 15 that tells Drupal what function should be run in the AJAX response. So we give it the name of our JavaScript function we just wrote called slide down, lower camel case. And then we're going to pass our other response data in this array as well. So on line 17, we pass our CSS selector we're going to want to target, and then a duration that we want the animation to occur on line 18. So this is all the code that went into creating this custom callback command. We have a JavaScript file, we have an info YAML file, a libraries YAML file, and a PHP class. What's interesting to note is that this module is completely usable in Drupal 8. There is no Drupal 8 code within it. You may argue that info.yaml is Drupal 8 specific, but there is no .module file. There are no hooks that we implemented. Nothing that is Drupal specific. Everything is pretty standard JavaScript and PHP. But this module is perfectly usable, and we'll have a new command to use within our Drupal project. That's all it takes to write a command. It's pretty awesome how basic it can be. So to create a callback command, you need to create a module. There's no other way you can do it. You need to write a JavaScript function that is attached to the Drupal.ajaxcommand.prototype object. Make sure that that command accepts those three arguments, AJAX Response and status. You have to attach that JavaScript file that defines that command to an asset library so it can be included on the page. And I'm going to show in the next section how to add a library to a page. And then you need the PHP equivalent, a PHP class that implements command interface, agreeing to that contract to have a render method with an associative array with the first element or an element with the key of command and the value being the name of your JavaScript function. Okay, so we know the structure of callback commands. We know how to write our own callback commands. Let's actually take a look at using callback commands in our Drupal project. So again, for this, I want to use an example scenario, something we can all follow along with. Now, if you've been working with Drupal for any amount of time, I'm sure you're used to seeing this page. This is the Watchdog log page, or the DB log page. This gives you a summary of all events that are logged in your Drupal project. So if a problem occurs, you typically probably come to this page and see what happened when you had an error. This page is very good for debugging. It gives you the type of error, when it occurred, a brief message about that error, who caused that issue. And then when you click on the message, you can get details, more details about that log message. So if you're searching for a problem on your Drupal 8 site, you're probably following along this path. You click on a message that seems like it might be the right one. You view the details, decide that's not the right one. You go back, you click on the next one in the list, view those details. Maybe that's not the right one. You go back and forth, back and forth. It can get pretty annoying if you're not exactly sure what you're looking for. So in our example scenario, let's improve this using callback commands in Ajax. What we're going to accomplish is loading that Watchdog log message details onto the overview page using AJAX Callback Commands. Now this involves writing a custom module. There's some other subtleties to this module to control that Watchdog log page that I'm not going to go through, again, because of the scope of this talk, but I'll touch on the things that are important for our needs. So the first thing we need to do is we want to attach the AJAX library to that page. We want to make sure that AJAX is available on the Watchdog log page. Because by default, it's not going to be there because Drupal doesn't need it there. And Drupal 8 is really great in only including files and JavaScript that it needs on pages. It no longer just adds everything, which is awesome for performance. So we have a module that we're calling AJAX_DBLog. And we have a controller. So we have a PHP class that is taking over that overview page. And I've put in the work to make sure it controls that page. So we have an overview method in our class, our controller class, that is generating that overview page. And to it, we want to attach a library that allows us to add the Ajax Framework. So one of the ways you can add a library in Drupal 8 is you can add it to a render array. So on line 9, we have a Drupal render array. And we're going to the attached argument, attribute of that array, within the library subarray, we're going to give it the name of a library we want to have included on the page. And we're going to include our own custom library. So we're going to give it the name of AJAX_DBLog / AJAX-DBLog. So now in our custom library, which we define in our AJAX-DBLog.libraries.yaml file, we give it the name of AJAX-DBLog on line 1. We include some CSS for styling, some JavaScript for additional behaviors we're going to implement. But then we add a dependency because we're going to want to use the slide down animation effect that we just built in the last example to make those details appear nicely to the user on the page. So we add a dependency to the slide down library. Now what you'll note is this is all about adding Ajax Framework to that page, but in this library I am not defining a dependency on the core Ajax, core Drupal Ajax library. That's because if we go back to the definition for the slide down library from our previous example, that library has dependency on Drupal Ajax core. So what happens now, when Drupal goes to load the overview page, it's going to see our library is attached. It's going to get the definition of our library. the AJAX DB-log library, it's going to see that that has a dependency on the slide down library. So it's going to get the definition of the slide down library, and it's going to see that slide down has a dependency on the Drupal AJAX library. And it's going to grab the details for that one. And for all of these libraries, it's going to grab all the JavaScript, all the CSS that's part of it, and add that to that page. So this means we just included the Drupal AJAX library using library inception, which is, I think it's pretty cool. We could go levels deeper, but we don't need to. Okay, so we have the library attached to the page. The next thing we want to make sure we have is something that actually triggers an AJAX event. So back in our overview method in our controller that is taking over the rendering of that overview page, I'm changing the links, the message title links, so that they act using AJAX. Now, if you've looked into AJAX with Drupal before, I'm sure you found examples on how to add AJAX to forms using an AJAX attribute. That tends to be the typical example. But you can add AJAX to links as well. And the way you do this is by adding a specific class to your link element. So on line 18 of this example code, I'm building an attributes array for rendering a link. And in that attributes, I'm specifying classes to put on that link element. And one of them is the class of use-ajax. So what use-ajax does is it tells the AJAX framework, hey, this link wants to trigger an AJAX request and send the endpoint it's pointing to via AJAX and not just with a page reload. And then on line 21, I'm just going to rebuild those message titles to point to a custom endpoint that we're going to define, which I'll go over in a moment, and passing those custom parameters and options. So right now what happens when the overview page loads, it looks like this. Exactly the same to the user. But under the hood, a lot has changed. Our custom module, AJAX DB-log, is handling the output of this page. It's attached its own custom library to the page, which in turn has included the slide down library, which has in turn included the AJAX library. And we've changed the way these links render so that they have the use AJAX class attached to them, which means they're going to trigger AJAX requests instead of just page reloads. Okay, so as I said, these links are now pointing to a different endpoint. And this is an endpoint we define in our AJAX dblog.routing.yaml file. Now this endpoint has a path defined. You can think of endpoints in Drupal 8 sort of like if you were to use a hook menu in Drupal 7. This is the exact same thing, just in YAML format. So on line 2 of our custom endpoint, AJAX dblog.event, we point to a path that has 2 arguments in it, method and event ID. Line 3 and 4, we're telling Drupal what class to call and what method inside that class to execute when this endpoint is hit. And then we have some requirements for this class, for this endpoint, such as who can go to it. Someone has to have access to site reports. And then we have a requirement for the method argument in our path. The method argument only accepts 2 strings, Node.js or AJAX. And the purpose of this is for what's known as graceful degradation. So what happens when Drupal renders that overview page and builds those links pointing to this endpoint, all those links are going to have a path that looks like this. Points to admin reports dblog/node.js event, and then the event ID. But when those links are clicked on, the AJAX framework is going to change this path to be admin reports dblog AJAX event 123. The difference being Node.js and AJAX. And what this is important is we can use this method, which will be passed as an argument to our function, to figure out how a user got to our endpoint. Did they get there via AJAX, in which case we want to return an AJAX response, or did they get there not using JavaScript with Node.js, to which if we were to give them an AJAX response, it would do nothing for them, so we want to maybe redirect them to the actual details page, or give them a different experience. So let's look at how we build a response to our callback command. So a link on the page is clicked, it hits our endpoint, which hits our function in our controller, our function called AJAX event details. And on line 10, we check our method argument to see, is it AJAX? If it is, then we're going to build an AJAX response. So on line 14, we implement the AJAX response class, and this is provided by the AJAX framework of Drupal core. Now, the response object, the AJAX response object, has a bunch of methods attached to it, but what's important for our needs is the add command method. So on line 16, we're going to add callback commands to our response to be sent to the client. So the first command we add on line 16 is the remove command, the core command we looked at earlier. And so we pass a CSS selector. We want to remove, we're going to assume that when someone hits this endpoint, it's not the first time they've done so, so we want to remove any additional data we attached to that page previously. So we're going to call the remove command with a CSS selector. Then on line 18, we're going to add an additional callback command. We're going to call the after command, which will insert markup onto the page after a certain element. So we pass a selector and our rendered HTML. And then on line 20, we're going to call add a third command, our custom slide down command, to animate exposing that message details. So we implement new slide down command, we pass it the selector and the duration. So what happens now is on our endpoint, we build an AJAX response. Our method here returns that response in the Drupal response framework. We'll actually turn that into a JSON array that it sends to the client. So now when this message is clicked, when the message title is clicked, it hits our custom endpoint, builds that response of callback commands, and returns that response to the client. And I know this is hard to see, so let's expand what this actual response data is. So this is the actual data from that response from that call. We'll see it's a JSON array that contains 3 objects in the order they are attached. So the first one being the remove command, the second one on line 7 being the insert command with the method of after, and the third one on line 14 is our slide down command. Now you may notice from our previous sections and going through these, let's take for example the remove command. This object that is attached to this array, it's the exact same thing as the associative array that was turned by the render method of the remove command PHP class. It has the command name in the selector string. It's the same case for our custom slide down command on line 14. We're passing our selector string and our duration that we defined in our PHP class. They've just been turned into JSON objects in an array. So now what's going to happen with this response is the AJAX framework is going to parse through this data. It's going to say, okay, for this first object, give me the command. I'm going to send this data as a response and execute that JavaScript attached to my object. Then it does it for insert, then it does it for slide down. So the effect we see now as a user is we click on a message title, the AJAX response is triggered, returns our data, and executes those callback commands, exposing the message details right on the page. And we can see when we click on one, it removes the previous data attached to the page with that remove command, inserts it, and then calls our custom slide down command. So to use callback commands, we want to make sure that we include the AJAX library and any custom commands onto the page that we want AJAX functionality to occur on. Remember, Drupal is not going to by default add to the AJAX library. You have to make sure on any pages that you want the AJAX library or AJAX functionality to be on, you attach that library. If we're dealing with a custom callback command and a custom endpoint, we want to make sure that we have set up an endpoint that returns an AJAX response object. And to have the AJAX library use callback commands on the client side, to this object, we attach commands using the add command method, just instantiating classes, the command classes. Okay, so let's review everything we've talked about today, because I know these 3 sections have a lot of details in them. Again, AJAX callback commands, what they are the functions that are used in every AJAX request in Drupal 8. Anytime an AJAX request occurs, is building a response of callback commands, and the JavaScript is executing those commands. Take a look at any AJAX request, inspect it, and you'll see that array of callback commands. Callback commands are composed of 2 parts, a JavaScript function attached to the Drupal.ajaxcommands.prototype object, and a PHP class that implements the command interface, which means it defines that render method and returns an associative array that has an element with the key of command and the value being the name of the JavaScript function. And then callback commands are defined by the AJAX Framework or Drupal core. Again, there are 25 in Drupal 8. And by modules, both ones you write and the ones provided by the Drupal community. To create your own callback commands, you need to create a custom module. You have to create a module. There's no other way about it, but you don't have to write a lot of module code. You have to write a JavaScript function that attaches itself to that Drupal.ajax commands prototype, making sure it accepts those 3 arguments of AJAX Response and status. And you have to write a PHP class that implements command interface and agrees to that contract with the render method and the associative array. Now, to use AJAX callback commands, again, you have to include the AJAX framework and any custom commands onto the page you want AJAX functionality to occur on. You have to have an endpoint of some sort that returns an AJAX response object, and you attach callback commands to that object by using the add command method. So that's all I have for you guys today. I hope you've gotten a lot out of this. I do have some resources to share with you. I'll put this slide back up in a moment when we get through answering questions. Now, the first resource is the Drupal.org information on the Drupal 8 AJAX framework, and it lists all the info about the core commands and how to use them. I have a link to this presentation that's annotated, so you can go through it at your leisure and review everything we've gone over. We have presentation slides on SlideShare for this presentation, again, annotated, available. Now, the AJAX DB log module that we use as an example in the last section, when I gave this presentation at DrupalCon New Orleans, people came up afterwards and actually asked for that to be a real module instead of just example code. So now that module is available for use on Drupal.org. So you can do a search for AJAX DB log. And feel free to view the source of that module because it was written as example code, so it's fully documented and should be helpful in building your own custom commands. And it includes within it the slide down command. And then finally, a blog post I've written, I think like a year ago, on how to create your own commands in Drupal 8, just as a refresher on everything we talked about today. Now I want to thank you guys for listening to me today. I greatly appreciate feedback on my sessions. I always try to think of them as a work in progress and they can be improved. So please send me feedback on Twitter or on Drupal.org through the message contact. Just let me know. And I just want to thank you again, and we have time to answer questions, so we can do that now. And when I do that, I will put that up, the resources slide. So let's see what questions there are. AimPep says, how do I expand it?
If you want, you can send us a copy of the presentation and we can see that everyone gets a copy, so they've got other links and they don't need to worry about copying the links off the screen or pasting it into chat.
I can do that, yes. I'll make sure that there's a link somehow to this presentation available on the description for this presentation.
Right, great. So the next one is there a Drupal console command to boilerplate code for creating AJAX?
That's a great question, Nai. I hope that's how you pronounce your name. I don't know. That'd be great if there were. I know Drupal console has a lot of great boilerplate framework code in there. I would highly say if there isn't one, the Drupal console people are great at taking pull requests. We could write some framework code that would allow that to happen. I think that would be a great idea.
He's actually giving 2 sessions later on, so if you want to ask the people about Drupal console with AJAX, you'll have your opportunity.
Even better. That's great.
Does anyone else have any more questions? You've stunned them all into silence.
Tends to be my MO. I'm just that good, I guess.
How do you troubleshoot AJAX?
How do you troubleshoot AJAX? From Ed Reel. Great question, Ed. I would say probably your number one tool for troubleshooting AJAX first is on the client side is using an inspector. Like in Google Chrome, you can inspect network so you can see what sort of response you're getting. If you have a malformed response, you won't see that array of callback commands. On the server side, in your local testing environment, if you use something like PHP Storm or Xdebug, you can place breakpoints in your command classes that are returning or that's building the AJAX response, and you can just see if those are being hit or what's going to be returned in the response before it gets built. In terms of troubleshooting, let's say AJAX with a form, typically you'll have a method for your form that's like adding form elements, and you can just, again, I'd recommend putting Xdebug breakpoints there and just seeing if it's being hit correctly and if the response is being built as callback commands. I hope that's a helpful explanation.
It's a pretty deep
it's a pretty, yeah.
How do you enable AJAX in views?
I mean, if it's on or if it's off. Thank you, Suzanne. What does enabling AJAX in views mean if it's on or off? So it depends on the view, from my experience. If it's something like for pagination, if AJAX is enabled, then it won't take you to technically another page with a different URL. It'll just load the next page of items onto the page. I'm trying to think what else views can have on it for AJAX functionality, like for filters as well. So if you have exposed filters and you have that going through AJAX, you'll refresh the filters on the page instead of having the user have to click like submit. Those are two ways I've seen AJAX use in views. I'm sure there are others. And actually, the admin side of views uses custom callback commands for popping up those little modals, for configuring, for adding fields or configuring filters and whatnot. That all uses AJAX callback commands to let you do that. All right, Ed, good. I'm glad that was helpful.
Any final questions? No, I think everyone's happy. All right, thank you very much for attending. Thank you, Michael, for hosting this session on using AJAX.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
No problem. Well, without your volunteer time, it helps make the day, doesn't it? No final questions then? Is that it? No, I think you're done. Right, thank you very much.
Wait, I think there's one more.
Oh.
Pep says he has, I have one.
Go on, Pep.
Suspense is killing me. How do you find your way through
CPU log screens?
Oh, how did I find my way through the DB log screens to make my module? Great question. I can say it was a lot of effort because when I first thought of doing that as an example, the first time I built this presentation, I had no idea what I was doing, so it was long nights. What really did for me was going through the DB log module and looking through its controller and seeing how it actually built that overview page, and then learning about dependency injection and how I could swap out what class was being used to generate that page, and then extending that core controller, which is what my module does, to just take over rendering of the overview page and adding my own code to it.
Yes, videos will go on Drupal 8 Day when they've been edited, and probably YouTube. We'll be sending emails out to everyone who registered. So if you're here, then chances are you're going to get an email as it goes live.
Okay, so from Robert, he asks, is there performance implications on having too many AJAX commands set up on your site? Initially, Robert, I would say no, because again, Drupal is only going to attach the JavaScript to a page that you tell it to. Now, if you are attaching tons of commands from multiple different files or multiple different modules onto a single page, probably there's performance implications the time it takes Drupal to build that JavaScript. Now, if you have aggregation turned on, that will handle that, so it won't be as bad. But typically, you're not going to see too many performance implications because, again, you're not going to have everything included on one page. It's just the stuff you need. And AimPep asks, how do you find the use AJAX class and what it does to the previous. Well, so the way I found use Ajax, that is something that's been in place in Drupal since Drupal 6. I found out information about that on actually Drupal.org with part of the Ajax Framework, and how you add that to links. Now, how you add that to an HTML link, there are multiple ways to do it. If you use like the link function, you can pass attributes which accept an array of class names to add. But as long as you have the Ajax framework on it, it's going to know about use Ajax. Yes, use Ajax uses the core JavaScript framework. The core Ajax framework knows what use Ajax is, and it knows when it's added to a page to look at any links that have use Ajax as a class name, and to treat those as Ajax links and not as regular links. So if you want your own links to trigger Ajax, just add use Ajax to their class name, and then make sure the Ajax framework is attached to that page. Could the regular Ajax endpoint be used with jQuery with my own commands? Could the regular Ajax endpoints be used with jQuery? The way I read that question is, can endpoints that are specified by Ajax, can you add your own commands to them? I think that would be a little hard to do. You'd have to somehow on the server side, no matter what, you have to intercept that command and add your callback commands to it. I don't think you could, like jQuery.post. If you just call jQuery's Ajax functionality directly, it's not going to use the Ajax framework, so it's not going to make use of those commands. Now, within your post like success method, you could call the callback commands as long as that, again, that global object is on the page. So you can call those commands and then pass them the arguments they're looking for. So you could do that. Great questions. Thank you, everybody.
All right, I think that might actually be it this time. All right, thank you everyone for attending, and Michael, thanks again once more for giving us an hour of your time to grace us with your presence. And yeah, if you're registered, you will get an email about follow-on details, and if you've got any resources you want to send me, Michael, then we'll include that in the reference pack.
Will do.
All right, thank you very much.